You're welcome.
Good evening and welcome to Creative Cabin Fever. On tonight's show, we have Sean Corcoran. He is best known for many things, actually, quite the character. Sean, introduce yourself to everyone.
Well, best known for many things and quite a character. Well, I can't beat an introduction than that. That's I can't beat that.
Good. So my first question for you then, Sean, was how did Am Waterford come about as an idea? Because that's something I find fascinating.
Well, I suppose like as an artist, like it kind of is an art project, even though it's a kind of a social media platform. It's a Facebook group, and there's 23,000 people, or a bit more than 23,000 people on it at the moment. So for me, as an artist, I suppose positivity is kind of a big part of my work in terms of sharing the positive in things. So the I Am Waterford group was an idea that I had that quickly took to one. Like I got funding to do it through Creative Ireland and the Waterford Council. So thankfully, the moment it was launched, the timing was perfect. I can't exactly remember exactly, but like we had within a matter of days, we had 10,000 people on it. So really, the first few weeks were difficult because it was a case of training the audience to understand the idea that it has to be about positivity. It has to be about people. It's about showcasing our pride and positivity for all things Waterford. So you can't put a picture of your cat. You can't put a picture of Woodstown Beach. So that kind of took 3 or 4 weeks of almost babysitting with it in terms of just making sure that people understood that. And it kind of runs itself almost now in terms of people kind of self-police it in terms of making sure everybody is following the guidelines. So it's I check in on it 2 or 3 or 4 times a day sometimes, and I have a bit of fun with it myself as well. So now that people understand how it works, it's just it's a means of showcasing our pride and positivity for Waterford.
Yeah, it's an absolutely beautiful page, and I love the fact that there are people all over the world getting in touch with family members or getting pictures of things like Ballybricken. That's a really beautiful thing for people to be able to look at. It's always something I really admire, and it's a page I really respect. So thank you for starting that.
You're
The next
welcome.
question, sorry?
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you. The next question was about obviously your history with the Salvage Yard and how all of that was when you started doing art there.
Okay. Well, I left school when I was 16. I did my leaving cert actually when I was 16, and I like the last few years of school was just like that was the last place I wanted to be. Even though I was quite diligent up until kind of the intercert as it was back then. But the salvage shop, my dad, Jim, has been, I suppose, from a business and entrepreneurial point of view, my dad, Jim, has been my greatest influence in terms of getting up, getting out, earning a crust, making a living. So when I was 16, I didn't know what I wanted to be, let alone knowing that I was an artist. I mean, it took me a few years to realize that. But the salvage shop, Dad was at a loose end, I was at a loose end, and it was the two of us coming together. It wasn't, I was driving him and he was driving me as much. And, between us, we had a Toyota Corolla and a trailer. So we used to go up and down to Belfast, pulling bricks and beams. And so like we had, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, I guess, 20, well, that makes me sound old, doesn't it? 20 years on the road. It was like being inside a film. Like the whole thing was just surreal. We had the premises in St. John's Park, massive big airport hangar of a kind of a building, 10,000 square foot of a building, and 3 acres around it. So for me, it was like a playground in terms of all these raw materials, all salvaged and recycled. So I suppose my art began, like I started in stained glass and I moved into mosaic, and you know, really my job in the salvage shop was to, I was like the artistic director in terms of people would come in and they'd say, I want to do something in the living room, whether it's you know, I want to do something with some bricks and some beams. So a lot of my work would have been just designing out simple ideas for how would you use these materials in all kinds of bizarre settings, from hairdressing salons to hotels and gardens. And so I got to experiment with so many different materials and being paid to do it, which was fantastic, because, you know, that really taught me in terms of thinking outside the box. Here's a load of materials. You know, if I'm left in a situation, even at the moment with the isolation I've been through, or the kind of the lockdown, or the guidelines in terms of the current crisis, I don't really have any difficulty with, here's a roll of string, here's some sticks, here's some rocks, here's some keys, and some old books. So it makes something like that. So I just kind of really look at materials in a very kind of objective way, I suppose, in terms of, right, what can we do? How are we going to record it? What are we going to make? And I suppose down through the years, a big part of that has also been, how am I going to make a living out of it? So it's kind of drawing a line between making the art that I wanted to. At the same time, you have to, as an artist slash designer, through a lot of those years, I've had to sell my soul less and less, I would say, than, you know, thankfully, people, like, to be honest, I've gotten to make in my career the things I wanted to be making, whether it was interiors or furniture or crazy stuff or artwork or having exhibitions in the salvage shop. So thanks to my dad and the amazing team that we had at the salvage shop, I got to fulfill my, that was my training as an artist, in terms of being out there and tire kicking out in the yard, looking at the materials and considering the possibilities, and figuring out how I was going to be paid, and how everybody else, how all the staff were going to be paid at the end of the week, because it's all very well being an artist, but at the same time, you need to have some sense of, well, I certainly have had to, how are you going to feed all these people around you, you know, in terms of creating some of the ideas and collaborating on different ideas. And we had carpenters and Eddie on the stained glass, and we had lads out in the yard, Philly, and some of, I won't start naming people now, but like literally there was a team around me, and on a Monday morning when we'd all arrive in eventually and get started, like lads would be looking for, what am I doing today, Sean? So that was my job, handing out the sheets of drawings and designs that people had commissioned me to have made. So it was that was my job, was passing on the drawings and making sure everything fitted in place for what people wanted.
Perfect, and that's beautiful, which brings me on to my next question. What made you realize sand was a good medium for you to use now?
Well, well, that's interesting now, because your third question brings us onto the sand, because you sent me a list of your sketched out questions the other day, and I kind of said to you, look, if it's okay with you, I'm going to take them as they come. I think it's more kind of genuine to respond in a kind of conversational way. So the first two questions were a nice surprise. But yeah, so bringing it back to the sand, I suppose, how it all happened, my wife Miranda and I, we run an art school here on the Copper Coast called the Art Hand, and we're open nearly 10 years. But when we had built the place, I was looking at the materials in the area, and as I've explained, I come from a background in salvage and recycling, so I'm looking here along the incredibly beautiful, rugged Copper Coast, looking for inspiration, and I can't see any, and it's like I'm stuck. Like I'm looking at the grass and the rocks and the sand and the sea and the seaweed, and I just can't see, like, I can't bring in machinery and equipment. I'm not going to be building monuments. Like, I mean, what can I build? And to be honest, I was sitting on the cliff above Kilmurran Cove, where I often draw, which is my kind of like home turf, as it were. And I was looking down on the beach below, And it was really like an epiphany moment, because right there in front of me in the car park below me, I could see a horse, a horse box, a jeep and a horse box arrived, and the guy took a horse out of a horse box, brought the horse down onto the beach, and led the horse around and around in circles below me on a rope, like a lunge rope. And it left the most dramatic, well, for me, I was looking at this as, well, look at this. There's a canvas right below me and I hadn't even seen it. So it was like an epiphany moment. The guy went away with the horse and I took a couple of photographs of it. It was the 22nd of April, 2011, I think that was. Yeah, 2011. That's, what's that, 9 years ago? Nearly 9 years ago. So, so that moment kind of really stuck in my mind. So I immediately thought, well, if there's if the whole idea with sand art is if you're looking at it or viewing it or photographing it in the direction of the sun, if the sun is behind it, it has a higher contrast. So for instance, with the horse, just simply turning over the damp sand left a beautiful contrast to the sand that had already been compacted. So I thought to myself, well, how can I recreate that? So I went home, got a rake, came back down and started experimenting, and I realized that it's quite a simple process. I didn't know had it been done before, but it turns out there's a community around the world that do sand art. Not many of us, maybe a dozen, not even probably a dozen full-time sand artists around the world. So it's and I've gotten to meet a lot of those recently, which was nice. But so I suppose that's how it all came about in that moment when the horse, when I saw that horse, and I thought, well, if a horse can do it, so can I.
Wow, that's amazing. I wasn't expecting that answer. I'm really happy I asked that question. Yeah, because obviously I've seen people do sand sculpture before, but you're correct. There's not that many sand artists in the world, so it's very different what you do.
Yeah, it is, I guess. It is. I suppose these days I would be better known for doing the sand art, although I do lots of other things as well. But it's like, I suppose, as an artist, people associate you with something, and I suppose these days I am most associated with drawing giant pictures on beaches with a garden rake.
Personally, I adore your glass work, and I love the fact that you're so into circles. I think your circle work is always very nice and admirable. So I do know all your different things, but you're correct. Most people would know you for the sand art.
Indeed. Well, I suppose the circles, just I don't know if that's one of your questions, but like the circles ideas, like they appear in all my work, whether it's mosaic or glass or forest art or sand art. And just to if you want to know the background to them, they're not actually circles; they're bubbles.
Okay.
They're bubbles. They're oxygen bubbles. I nearly drowned when I was about 12, and I didn't realize for maybe 10 or 15 years afterwards that a lot of my drawings through my early career as an artist were these bubbles going to the surface, and it's a direct reflection of what I saw as I was drowning. My mother saved me. Thanks, Mum. And my sister Jackie actually nearly drowned at the same time. It was just freak waves during the summer. So what I saw do you know the way they say when you're drowning that there's this moment where at the end there's this peaceful passage. It was in that stage, literally, where it wasn't anymore a struggle. I remember it vividly still. I remember it visually kind of still, I suppose, quite vividly. So it was kind of like all time stood still, and I remember gazing up at the surface of the water, which maybe was 5 or 6 or 7 feet above my head, and all I could see was these bubbles going up to the surface. So that's where the bubbles come from. And I remember I was asked recently the same question, and about the bubbles. And it wasn't until I was being interviewed on WLR on a late, I think it was WLR, on a late night program. It was in the middle of the night, and Ben Hennessy and myself were called into the studio. I don't know what we were talking about, but and I can't even remember. It might have been Jeff Harris was the presenter. I can't really remember, to be honest. But I was asked this question: why do all the bubbles appear in your work? And it wasn't until that moment. I was actually Ben and I. Well, no, I actually was drinking wine in the studio and having a kind of conversation. When some of these kind of things live on air with the 6 listeners in the middle of the night, so it just kind of came out of me. I realized at that moment that that's what it was. So like a lot of my work is to do with that kind of thing. I see something or I feel something, and it could be, in that case, I don't know, 10 or 15 years later that I realized, or in some cases, now that I'm more aware and more connected in my process, it could be, you know, I realize it's because yesterday something happened, or because of the news, or because of how people around me are feeling, or so the emotions. So it's a lot, the process is a lot more transparent for me now these days in terms of realizing what my work is about. I don't read into my work that much, or I don't analyze my work. I might be like, I like to archive my work. I like to photograph it. I like to know when and where. But at the same time, I don't read into my work in terms of exactly the significance. Sometimes it's months later and I think of a piece that I did, and it kind of fits in to why or what, or, oh, that's interesting, I made that because that was the same. I made that in sand art, and then I had a commission in a school, and then I didn't, that was because of that. Oh, right. So that was, so I can kind of sometimes look back and see progression, if you know what I mean, if you look at what you've done in the past. So the stained glass, the mosaic, the sand art, it has that kind of connection between, but I suppose more than that, like I suppose what we've been doing in the art hand for the last 10 years is collaborative projects, like teaching art, but also like collaborating, or, you know, bringing groups together. And that for me, I do have a skill in that regard, and so does my wife Miranda, in terms of working with groups and facilitating like different things that really bring people out of their comfort zone and challenge people to come together and do new and exciting things. So yeah, well, anyway, that's a long way to get around to the bubbles, or the circles as some people see them. But that's yeah, they're all based on the time when I nearly drowned.
Wow, that's really incredible answer. And the way that you figured it out, like a lot of us don't realize the way things that are traumatic kind of carry with us through life. And it can take us a lot of time to actually pinpoint where it came from. So I'd have my own personal experience with similar, but not the same. So I understand what you're saying. I obviously saw your work at All Together now. How did that come about?
How did it come about? Oh, yes. So when All Together Now was announced, being an artist in Waterford, I was all excited, thinking, oh, this is great, right on my doorstep. Love to, you know, I'd been doing a good few festivals with the sand art and different events around Ireland and the UK at that point, and I was like, I want to get back to wood. You know, I come from a background in wood, mainly in the salvage shop, but I wanted to get back into, you know, different new materials and stuff. So forest art, like I'm not known as an artist who works in forests that much, so I approached the All Together Now people, and it took me months and months and months of negotiation to finally be left in the door. In terms of the first year, well, this is the third year. Hopefully, this August, if it proceeds, I hope it will. I haven't heard otherwise. Have you?
Not yet.
Okay, fingers crossed. Well, look, fingers crossed. If it proceeds this year, like I've been in negotiations about what we'd like to do this year. the directors. But I suppose how it, like, it's very interesting, the dynamic, like spending the last 2 years there. Like the first year, Joe, my friend Joe Lonergan, and I spent, I think it was about 3 or 4 weeks in the forest, maybe 3 weeks in the forest. And like when we started, we were surrounded by pheasants and well, mainly pheasants, to be honest. Like, but it was a really beautiful. You'd hear the birds tweeting in the trees, and there's something really you'd hear people approaching. You'd hear the leaves moving and the wind changing through the trees. But as the weeks developed, like the crew came on board, and all the fencing and all the production came around you. So it was a beautiful time. But for me, I didn't realize until, I suppose, closer to the first year of the festival, that really the reason it took me so long to be accepted as part of the crew, as part of the first year's team, like God rest his soul, John Reynolds. I mean, what a visionary! But his whole vision for that first year and for the festival as it went ahead was, you know, you bring this crew of, like, you know, the music is a certain amount of it, right? But the whole thing that goes around the music, you know, Robbie Butler recently said to me that it's kind of like 50% of a festival is not just the music. It's not just Iggy Pop is going to be on the stage this year. It's like all the atmosphere and everything that goes around that. So like, for me, it wasn't until a few weeks into the first year that I realized that it's really like John Reynolds' vision was really about, you bring a circus, and all the members of the circus, like whether you're a performer, whether you're bringing in the gear, whatever you're doing to make the magic happen, you're part of the circus. And what I didn't realize at that point was I was applying to join the circus. So it was like as if, so why do you want to join the circus? Oh, look, if we just give this guy a load of, you know, come back to us with some ideas, or, you know, so it was literally months of pitching. And like in the end, I was nearly in tears saying, listen, lads, listen, I'm after being with that crowd. I've been dealing with a company in the UK. I've been over with this guy. Listen, lads, give a lad a break, all right? Let this lad in. Let this lad in for the first year. Bring him into the forest and see what he can make. So, I mean, they love me, I suppose, in terms of what Joe and I, in terms of like, we became part of the family, you know, and as the first year's festival progressed, even over during the course of the weekend, you know, the crew and the production, you know, we might be slightly bit more off duty, I suppose, at that stage, but we get to know each other, and that's when the bonding happens. And that's where in year two, it's never a question then of like, you don't have to apply in year two, because it's like, right, what can you do? What budget do you need? What are you going to do? And this year, even more so. Now, sadly, of course, John Reynolds has now passed, is no longer with us. So Robbie Butler is the guy I'm dealing with these days, who would have been John's right-hand man. And Robbie is a fantastic guy in terms of, like, he's a real, like at festivals, production is like troubleshooting. As you know yourself from gigs and events and music, is like, you know, the show goes on, the curtains have got to open, you get the, you know, as long as the audience, as long as the punter's at the front, you know, everything, whatever the chaos is going on behind the stage, it's like, get the show open, get it on. So like, Robbie Butler is is a pure genius in terms of troubleshooting on the hoof. So I really enjoyed that about him in the first year. Sadly, in the second year, apart from John Reynolds no longer being with us, Robbie's own father had passed away as well, right before the festival. So, like, as a family or as a circus, you like, genuinely, Joe and I did feel, and even Miranda, my wife, and our kids, like the bigger unit in terms of what we brought last year, we really did feel part of the family. So, like, when the ringmaster is dead, you're kind of like, you're in mourning. So you're trying to get over the line in the second year. Then Robbie Butler's father, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, I'm sure it's common knowledge, you know, it made everything so much more difficult in the second year. But again, we all just got down in the dirt and swapped jobs, and everybody did everybody else's jobs, and we all, again, just tried to get the thing open. So it's the third year, like, hopefully if it goes ahead, I've got some exciting plans in mind to kind of bring the area that Joe and I and others have been working in to the next level. So it's but it's always kind of a battle between like the budget, the amount of people you're going to need, the amount of infrastructure. You know, like I love coming up with ideas, but at the same time, I like being down on my hands and knees as well, kind of, you know, getting my hands dirty as well. So the bigger a project, the less you can get your own hands dirty. So I'm kind of like, as an artist these days, and thankfully over the last 10 years, we've been able to make a living out here on the Copper Coast. And so I'm always questioning, like, how big do you want? Like, if somebody gives you a big budget, does that turn you into, like on a building site, you'd have a foreman? I don't want to be a foreman. You know what I mean? So from that point of view, the Altogether now has just been, for the first few years, has just been absolutely perfect for me. So I do have big plans, but at the same time, I'm just a little bit cautious about what they involve in terms of collaborating with the bigger group, and, you know, making some of the ideas possible will involve more people. So were you there the last 2 years?
I was there last year. I wasn't there the year before. Myself and my son spent a lot of time in those woods, so we really enjoyed the magic.
Ah, lovely. Great to hear it. You know, it's like the idea of temporary art, and, you know, you look at something that's, now it might be my huts or my pathways through that forest, or little moments where you can just sit in. But like for me, it's like when I go back there 12 months later and I see that little structures are still barely intact, or that there's, you know, the animals have come back, and that's the kind of, for me, the cycle of these things is the beauty of it for me, to be honest. Like the fun fair of when all the lights and we're all happy, and, you know, during the festival, you know, everything, all the lights go away and everything comes away, and the pheasants come back, and all the little buds come up, and the ivy goes back. And that for me is the whole cycle. That 12-month cycle is the beauty of kind of stuff like that coming back to it. Now, I haven't been there for a few months, so I know you know, I've left some pieces there that are still there. There's the W bench. There's the you know, there's items that are just left there that I know I can just imagine how they'll be, and as nature is growing over them, and all the insects and the birds and the wasps. And last year, I'm sure you remember the wasps that arrived. So, you know, stuff like that nature, you know, like there was sections further down we weren't able to open it up in the end last year, where I actually stumbled into, Joe was right behind me, and we were slashing our way through. It was like a big jungle, literally, at the back of where, you know, we were always negotiating our boundary in terms of how safe is it for people to come this far. So we, you know, we'd negotiate with Robbie, can we get another bit? Can we get, if we could just clear that area and, you know, save these ferns, but, you know, create a no man's land here so that people won't destroy that habitat, or, you know, we don't want to have to, nature to have to try and rebuild itself there. How far in can we allow humans in a kind of a navigable, in a kind of a sustainable way, that 12 months is enough for nature to go through its cycle to come back. But so the wasps were a really interesting part of that for me last year. I did kind of stumble into a wasp's hive, and I did break out in a big rash, and well, I had a reaction to it. I got 5 or 6 stings, and got chased out of the deepest part of the forest with Joe running behind me. Isn't that right, Joe? So no, look, it's a fantastic thing. It's but like for me, I suppose, though, I'm quite a pensive artist in terms of, I don't psychoanalyze my past work, but if you said to me what am I gonna make next month or next week or tomorrow, like the process that I use in terms of what I'm gonna make next week or next month or next year is very meticulous in terms of like thinking about, well, is it environmental? Is it sustainable? Is it this? Is it that? Is it what am I trying to achieve here? You know, and like as artists, like all human beings have an ego, and artists have their own ego in terms of, you know, what is this work about? And like, especially with the sand art and stuff like that, that might reach a lot of people, shall we say. Like, I always have to kind of question my own motives in terms of, well, what is the intention with the work? Like, so that, like, a lot of my work, even though it might just look like a nice spirally, scribbly, bubbly picture on the beach, for me, it's very much more than that, and all that more work is done in advance in terms of, you know, what is it about? No, I don't. It doesn't need to be pigeonholed into something, but at the same time, and it can be as simple as not knowing what is going to be in advance and just responding to the space, whether it's in a forest, whether it's on a beach, whether it's sticking pieces of stones and sticks and stones onto a mosaic. So that process is okay too, in terms of like it being a mindful kind of meditative process. But there's a lot of thinking goes into kind of like allowing yourself the space to express that as well. So so yeah, altogether now it's been fantastic, and fingers crossed. I don't know. I mean, like, I was in Texas recently on a festival, and it felt like the last event on the planet, because the whole planet had shut down. There was no events anywhere. It wasn't until the last minute that the governor in Texas called a state of emergency. So I kind of felt privileged in some ways to be, you know, still down on my hands and knees in the earth and the sand and the gravel and the rocks and the sticks in Texas. And when I finally emerged from the 2 weeks over there, I realized that the whole world was in shutdown. So, but that's perhaps another question of yours. But altogether now, what a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful thing. I really hope it goes together this year, goes ahead again this year. It's just, I think it's one of the highlights Waterford has to offer in terms of Corcoran, the estate out there. It's fantastic, you know what I mean? And seeing the smiles on the people as they're walking around, walking up and down past our area in the forest or up to the main stage and back down around the house. It's just beautiful. So long may it last.
Absolutely, and you're right. You're going through my questions without me having to ask them, so I'm going to have to think on the cuff here. Okay, since I am a music promoter, what song inspired you to make art, and what art did it inspire?
What song? Give me that again. What song?
What song has inspired you in the past to create art, and what art has it made you create? Or has there been a song that has inspired art?
Yes. Like, when I knew, like, from your background in music, as a music promoter and all the rest of it, like, I knew that you'd be throwing in one of the questions that I didn't look at must have contained music. So, but to be specific about your question, yes, like, I do respond to my emotions, and sometimes like how my relationship with music is very much based on absorbing myself in the one song or the one album for days or weeks or months at end. So so at the moment I'm listening, or have been. I haven't been the last couple of weeks, but for the 2 months, well, maybe 6 or 8 weeks, yeah, before that, I've been listening to an album by called Sacred Love by Sting. And Sacred Love by Sting is it's a beautiful album. And for me, before I went to Texas and while I was studying like Native Americans in terms of like what happened there, or like researching what I was going to make and looking at the materials I was going to have in front of me, like Sacred Love has a kind of a tribal feel to it in terms of what we're doing to the planet maybe, or what we're doing as human beings. So it's kind of like I do have a kind of my own personal soundtrack going on, but how I respond to that, sometimes like there has been some personal occasions in my life where a song might have a direct connection with a piece of visual art that I might make. A lot of my work I wouldn't be explaining. A lot of my work that might just look like a pretty mosaic or a beautiful piece of stained glass would for me would personally have a lot deeper meanings that I'm not going to go into now, in terms of like there is one or two things I can think of, but I suppose for me, as mainly a visual artist, right? Now, visual would include film, or it would include drawing, or, you know, the visual art is a broad kind of a thing. Like for me as a visual artist, I suppose I kind of see music as a kind of as an emotional connection with the visual of what I'm doing. So let's say in a film, like Angela Mulcahy and I made a film a good few years back called Down the Ladder, and we were nicely funded for it. So it was Eric Sweeney, we were able to commission Eric Sweeney to make a soundtrack for it. So that for me, in terms of trying to make a visual, like my mind is preoccupied with the visual. So as a buffer or as a soundtrack, I do hear things in terms of like, what does this sound like if it was a sound rather than a visual? So there is that kind of thing. And like often when I'm doing visual art, like even sand art, I would be thinking what the emotion of what, like let's say it was a special piece that had a context. I'm thinking, how does this sound? Now for me, the sound is not just about the music. It could often be about the seagulls and the waves and the sea and the stream and the wind, and, you know, voices in the background, and children playing voices of different, you know, that you zone in and out on sounds in that regard. So for me, like in film they call it Foley, like the Foley, kind of those little sounds of like, what can you really hear? And when you're being really mindful, like what is it that you know, and then sound all disappears and you only hear one thing. It might just be the wind, or it might be the tide actually turning, and that moment when you can hear a different sound of the tide approaching rather than going away. You know, like today was actually the lowest tide of the month. I've never seen Kilmurren. I can't remember seeing Kilmurren with as low a tide as it was today. And where I was working was a bit too far up from the edge, to be honest, to really appreciate it. But I strolled down once, and you know, the ground that's never opened up before at low tide like that is just suddenly, wow, it's just there, and the sound is so much different. The acoustics, it's like a building, you know, from gigs and music, it's like the different acoustics. Like, you know, when the building is empty, it sounds like this, and when the building is full with people, it sounds so much more connected. And sound has that effect as well. So I kind of like, I do have musical influences in terms of like some of the music that I put with my visuals. I suppose a recent piece that I did with the a thank you for the frontline workers, for the healthcare workers. I used a piece by a young Norwegian composer called Alexander. I have his name written down here somewhere in my diary. Yeah, his name is Alexander Nakarada, and Alexander Nakarada he's only a young guy, but a very, very talented musician, composer, from what I can see from the work I've seen by his. And he just, like, I'd be often looking for soundtracks or music that would kind of have a certain sentiment, that would work well with the sentiment I'm trying to portray in the visual medium that I'm using at the time. So Alexander's soundtrack went with that, and was shared with the Independent.ie and RTE and so on, the video And then there's a French composer called Benjamin Tissot, Tissot. And he again, he's a soundtrack artist where he'd be producing music and sounds that would have a context normally with film, but a composer beyond that, and he goes under the name of Ben Sound. So you may, free to a certain level, and you pay for other stuff for commercial use. So Ben Sound, Benjamin Tissot, Alexander Nakarada, Eric Sweeney. I do have a few friends who are musicians as well. Cheryl Beer in Wales. I've collaborated with her on a few pieces. Beautiful earth healing sounds. But she was and is a very famous singer-songwriter, writer and poet and artist. So Cheryl and I have collaborated on a few things, including a piece called Am Kali, where it was a kind of collaboration between a piece of music that she made under an apple tree in France, while I made a piece in Bunman. So it's I do like collaborating with artists like that. I also like the work of Miko Roach. I'm sure you know Miko. Miko's album, I think it's his second last album at this stage, Ember, an EP called Ember. Beautiful album. And Ember, like a fire has embers. So for me, a lot of my work has a kind of an emotional and poignant kind of context in terms of and life and death and the past and the future and the present. That kind of thing I suppose people see in my work as well. So his album really spoke to me, Ember. So we've been sharing a couple of tracks back and forth. In fact, Joe and I made a fire memorial to John Reynolds of All Together Now in the middle of the night one night. I think we started at 3 or 4 in the morning down in Kilmurn, and we lit a fire and created a fire memorial to John. And again, Miko's track, the title track from Ember, was used in that, and we've collaborated. He's used some of our visuals and so on. So I do like to, from a music point of view, I am a visual artist, but it's kind of like back there at the back. I don't. Miranda listens to WLR during the day, so if I'm in and out of the kitchen, it's like I hear WLR in the background and whatever's going on there. So I am very aware of sounds and voices around me in terms of changes of tone and stuff like that, or especially in nature and in the environment. So, but I don't follow the latest trend. I mean, I do have my own favorite music, but as I say, I like to exhaust an album until it's completely dead for a couple of months, and listen to nothing other than that, and then move on to something else.
Perfect. Brilliant answer. I was going to mention the thank you. What I do like about what you do as well is the messages you leave in the sand. For instance, that proposal, and then the thank you more recently. It's just very poignant to have words on sand as well. It's kind of something that all of us kind of do in romantic times, I guess, write our names in the sand and watch it all shove away. So I like that. So yeah, brilliant answers. I guess before I leave you go, since we've run through pretty much everything, creativity and captivity, you already mentioned. Obviously, you and your family have no problems thinking on your feet, and you're doing a lot of work together in arts and crafts, and you and Miranda with the school and everything, I'm guessing, are keeping busy that way. Perhaps you could name the first song you fell in love with in that case.
Whoa. Well, when I was in secondary school, first year or second year, which is a long time ago, but record players, I never had a record player, and I remember being in I don't know, was it Sinnets, or I think it must have been Sinnets, and I bought this album, the Madness album, with the lads going up the what's the name of that album? With the,
I am really bad at that game. I know the one though.
something in the middle, and then they're either like. But for me, I have to be honest. Like when I went into the record shop and I saw that, it was kind of like, oh yeah, the lads all have that. I'd have to have that. Oh, look at that! Look at that! That must be cool, right? And it was the visuals, to be honest, of like all the characters on the. And anyone watching this at this stage that knows Madness and knows that album, kind of like, they know the name of it, whatever. But like for me, I suppose it was that visual connection again with like connecting that with like, oh yeah, that must be cool because the lad said. And I remember bringing it home and delighted with myself and took it out and lovely new clean vinyl and all the rest of it. And sure, I didn't have a record player. So I had to find a record player or whatever. So I can't remember what happened after that, but it was just, it didn't matter to me. At the time buying it, I didn't even think about, oh, you'd need a record player to listen to that. It was more of kind of like a possession. It was kind of like, I have this now. Look at this. Look at this. I've gone into town on Saturday and I've come home with this. So for me, that was my first soiree into music collecting.
And it reinforces the fact that you're a visual artist. So it was the visual appeal of a musical piece that actually grabbed your attention. That's fascinating.
Yeah. I really think that, yeah, like it's kind of like, are you a mod? Are you a ska? Who are you? What are you? Like, it's like, and this is like a visual of like, I was a very quiet kid back then. Like, I wouldn't say anything to anybody. Like, I suppose when I was born in London, so when I was 4, I came to Ireland with an English accent. So like, you soon learn to keep it zipped rather than So I think that was my personality anyway. But it's kind of like I was very introvert. Is that the word? Introvert. So yeah. So even then, it was kind of like trying to fit in. But it was the connection with this. Was it ska? Was it mod? Who am I? What am I? Like, this whole kind of questioning. Like, I've had that kind of. I've been a pensive human being all my life, even since I was a child. Like, so from that point of view, I suppose trying to fit in and trying to figure out who I was, apart from the kind of visual connection, maybe, and mod and ska and all that business felt like. That has a big visual identity as well. My friend Keith Daniels from Against the Current, like, I mean, looking at even in retrospect, looking at the whole visuals of like how that stuff pans out in terms of who you are and what you wear and that whole identity, and it has something like that. And I suppose looking for identity, like music is often that kind of thing that gives you identity, I suppose. So for me as a struggling young teenager, I suppose that was like, whose club am I in, or what band am I? Who am I part of? Like, I suppose so. So Madness, I suppose that album was the first kind of realization I have of music, and in terms of like bringing it home, no record player, nothing.
Okay, well, what would have been the first artist, perhaps, that you fell in love with? That might be easier for a visual person like yourself.
And when you say the word artist, what does that limit? Does that eliminate music?
No, it doesn't. Okay. I'm sorry, but yes.
Okay. I'm not being patronizing, but I'm just gonna, if you meant it in a visual art kind of way, or a broader, and just to clarify that, like, I mean, I do have the utmost respect for all genres of art. Like, I mean, that people, like as a visual artist myself, like, I've had so many conversations with people that if you said to somebody, I'm a visual artist, like the second question they say, or if somebody said to you, what do you do? I'm an artist, right? Even if my response was simply, I am an artist, right? I'm an artist. The second question would be, first of all, eliminate all the writers and poets and songwriters and singers and sound and installation artists, all the other genres of art. And their second question would be, and what do you paint?
No, you're correct. So, and that's why I'm opening these interviews to all artists of all forms,
Yeah, so like, so your question is?
If you were to cite a time that you fell in love with art first, what was that time? And the question is open-ended, so you may answer it any way which it makes you feel.
Um, I don't actually think I've ever been asked that question before, which is nice. And I don't actually, like, for me, my journey as an artist has been very much about, in the early days, discovering or realizing or accepting that I was an artist. So it's kind of like, not really, there wasn't a moment when I said, oh my God, I just, Pablo Picasso, Marcel Duchamp, I just love that. Oh Jesus, look what those guys did with it. There wasn't really, I don't really have any idols where I can kind of say, oh my God, look at that guy, look what they did, look at this, how they did that, look at this. Now, I appreciate all forms of art, but at the same time, like when I was 16, 17, 18, a lot of my friends were going to art college. And I had done my leaving cert, I started making glass, I started making this, I started making a living, I was taking commissions, I was making stuff and taking commissions for making stuff. I didn't realize a lot of the stuff I was making back then wouldn't have been art anyway, it would have been just whatever. So, or was it? But for me, like, a lot of my friends would have been in art college, and I'd meet them after when they were finished in art college. I'd meet them in Jeff's, where I would have spent my day in Jeff's all day. Well, a lot of I would have worked. I would have been out there working and earning a crust, but I'd be playing chess with, like, some of the greatest minds in Waterford at the time, and losing badly, like, but more enjoying being present in kind of like superb company at strange hours of the day. And for me, many of people who went to art college in those days didn't pursue their career as artists. And I'm not being boastful or cocky here, but I did. I thought about it long and hard, and I thought about it, and I'm going to make something else tomorrow, and then somebody else wants me to make something, then I'm going to, and I just took it one step at a time without being intimidated by the amazing people that have gone before me, which often happened with people that went to art college. Like, oh my God, this has all been done before. How can you possibly? Oh no. I'm sure in music, oh, that sounds like Coldplay. You can't be on the right track. It sounds like that can't be. It's been done before. Like, all right, it must be really poor, or must be, and that's I could see that happening to many of my friends, and they didn't survive. They didn't, they got scared out of it or whatever, and so I really appreciate the fact that I didn't go to art college, didn't have any formal training in art, and from the moment I left school, I've been a full-time artist. So, but I suppose I am lucky in the fact that my family, my dad is a very charismatic entrepreneur, in that it's like, sure, whatever it is you want to make, just get up, get out, go on now, as long as you can, and he put up with me, and I put up with him for many years in the salvage shop, and it taught me, though, that, whatever it is you want, you can go out there and you can get it, and you can bring it back for yourself. So, but as a pensive person, in terms of thinking about who I am or what I'm doing so much, that worked for me. And it mightn't work for somebody else. Like, if I was going to give a young artist advice these days, that might not work for you.
I'd be similar to you in how I approach life. Human interactions and getting to know people would certainly be the thing that spurs me to do what I do in the everyday life. I find humans incredibly interesting, and that's why these interviews are, I think, working the way they are, because I just really love not dissecting people, but getting to know them and hopefully showing everyone else what they're like. Is there anything you would like to add to the interview before I leave you go?
Um, yes, I would like to say that what could I just turn the tables on you and just ask you?
Yes.
So Rebecca, in 10 years' time, when you look back on your time doing this creative online, what do you call it? Is the creative?
Cabin fever.
It's the cabin fever.
Creative cabin fever is what it's called.
Creative cabin fever. I listened to your interview with Roddy, and like Roddy, like I could really see that beautiful connection in terms of, like, you know, bringing something like this creative cabin fever to an audience now, even though there might only be a couple of hundred people looking at some of the videos or whatever, that's fine. But you're pushing the boundaries of, you know, the current moment. You're in that room and I'm in this room. And that for me is the very interesting thing of why I accepted your offer for the interview. So I would like to ask you, when you look back on this time in 10 years' time, do you have a set plan in your life in terms of a strategy as to where this is part of, like, you want to be an international journalist, or you want to be, this is part of your creative process in some way, or is it just footsteps along the way?
It's a combination of both, actually. So originally it started off as a mad idea, and I usually try run with those now because I'm starting to believe in myself, which has not been an easy path to come to, but right now I do. I love the idea that we'll have a time capsule to look back. So people who know you maybe in 10 years' time would be curious about how you survived in captivity and what you did to reinvent yourself and what you were up to at this time. Or people like Roddy, how he got on with things, or even Stan Phillips, that was the interview the other night, an incredibly interesting man. You're my 14th interview or my 15th interview, so there's quite a back log in 2 weeks' time that I've been able to amass, which I'm quite proud of. But it's certain I reinvent myself constantly. I have been a barber, I've been a florist, I am a fishmonger by day. I obviously do music promotion. It's actually my second time in music promotion because I did it 10 years ago and I'm starting over now with my own business. I've been a DJ, I've been a model. I am constantly reinventing myself and very proud that I take these chances. So where it's going to lead me to, I don't know, but for right now, it's a beautiful conversation that I hope to share with lots of other people in a time like this where they enjoy good conversation.
Well, Rebecca, thank you very much. I really think that this will be a formative part of what you become in 10 years' time, when you can look back at this, whatever it is that you're going to be in 10 years' time. I really think this is going to be a formative part of that. So listen, thank you very much for asking me to be your guest on tonight's or this evening's show, and thanks very much.
And thank you to you. What I'll do now is I'll just stop the recording and I'll ask anyone at home who's enjoyed this to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And I believe we're going to put this one up on Facebook as well, so Sean can share it around a bit easier. So we'll have YouTube and the Viking Promotions page, and this is called Creative Cabin Fever. Thank you very much.